We're looking into Black Laws, the 8th edition. Scroll down to the term man, and here we find it articulated as such: man, an adult male, humankind, also termed mankind, a human being, a vassal, a feudal tenant. So Black Laws Dictionary tells us that the word man is the same thing as the word human being. Now, if you don't like that, well, that's too bad. But the law recognizes this. So when you call yourself a human being, you are calling yourself, by equivalency, a man. We're looking at the Quebec Civil Code. And I chose to take you here because the expression of law is very clear without you having to jump to different enactments to find out what's going on. It states it very clearly here in Article 1 of the Quebec Civil Code. Every human being, so every man, possesses juridical personality and has the full enjoyment of civil rights. As a man, you possess juridical personality. And when we look into Black Law's Legal Dictionary, it tells us what a juridical person is. Legal person or artificial person, an entity such as a corporation, created by law and given certain legal rights and duties of a human being. A being, real or imaginary, who for the purpose of legal reasoning is treated more or less as a human being. That is what the law designates or calls a statutory creature. A statutory creature is a juridical personality. It's a person in law. It's a made-up being in law. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 16. Everyone, that's the human being, the man, shall have right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So we just saw, right, where the Quebec Civil Code said every human being possesses a juridical personality. Now, to possess something, it doesn't mean that you have to use it. So when we look to international law, right, and it says everyone, the human being or the man or the woman, shall have the right to recognition as a person before the law, as a statutory creature before the law. So as a man or a woman, you have the right to recognition if you choose to exercise that right of recognition. And law has provided for you to exercise that right by stating that you possess juridical personality. Not that you have to use it, but you possess it in the case if you want to use it. Looking back into the Quebec Civil Code, Article 2, every person is the holder of a patrimony. Now, in my past couple of videos, right, I've been trying to explain and been trying to share with individuals that you have a right to access a part of the natural resources that make up this country, that are within the landmass of this country. And it's an operation of law that has been put in place from international law that is to flow into domestic law. And when we look into the Quebec Civil Code, it says every person is the holder of a patrimony. It may be subject of a division or of an appropriation to a purpose, but only to the extent provided for by law. Now, did you catch this? And if you've been following me for a few years, and if you didn't catch this, okay, don't be hard on yourself, but realize how deep this thing goes, how deep the deception goes, that even after studying for many years, you can miss something simple like this. Here the law says that every person is the holder of a patrimony, not the owner of a patrimony, but the holder of a patrimony. And the person here is the statutory creature. That's who they're referring to. Now, if you've watched my other videos that I put out a few years ago concerning patrimony, the holder of a security is not the owner of the security, but is entitled to exercise all the rights and privileges as if they were the owner. So that's the operation of law that they use. They allow the person to be the holder of the patrimony, even though they're not the owner of the patrimony. Who's the owner of the patrimony? Well, the man or the woman. That's the owner of the patrimony. But because the legal person, the statutory creature, is the holder of the patrimony, the statutory creature can exercise all the rights and privileges of the patrimony. Again, I'm showing you step by step the operations of law that they're using against us as individuals. And I'm using the Quebec Civil Code because it's very clear to see. Even though the Quebec Civil Code may not apply to your province or to your state in America, the operations of law that you see here are just one and the same that they're using. I want you to get ready to hit pause on this video. So I'm going to ramble here for a second and give you a chance to get ready to hit pause. So I'm going to read you an article of law, and I want you to hit pause, and I want you to look at that article of law, and I want you to see if you can notice anything wrong here. The Quebec Civil Code, Article 5. Every person exercises his civil rights under the surname and usual given name assigned to him and stated in his act of birth. So the law states every person. And we understand that the word person here has to refer to the juridical personality, to the statutory creature. Why? Well, because we understand that only statutory creatures exercise civil rights. Remember, we already saw in the court judgment, individuals as a rule have full legal capacity by operation of law alone. Artificial persons, statutory creatures, juridical personalities are creatures of the state created by law and enjoy civil rights and powers only upon the approval of statutory authorities. So in law, what exercises civil rights? Well, the artificial person, the statutory creature. Now here the law reads every person exercises his civil rights assigned to him and stated in his act of birth. So they're trying to apply a personal pronoun to a statutory creature, and they exclusively use masculinity. His, him, his. So if this was referring to the natural, right, then they have excluded all females. They have excluded her because they specifically used the personal pronoun his. So what are you trying to say? That every person who exercises rights are masculine? No, that's not what the law is declaring, right? Whoever wrote this article of law didn't do a very good job, or did it on purpose to try and cause confusion. And I'll show you why in a minute. Every person exercises the civil rights under the surname and usual given name. Now watch, assigned. All right, so the name is assigned to the person. It's what the article is saying, right? The name is assigned, and that name which is assigned, it's assigned to a person. And that name is indicated in the act of birth. Quebec Civil Code, Article 50. Every person, now we know who they're referring to here, what capacity, right? Has a name which is assigned, now watch, to him at birth and is stated in his act of birth. All right, so the act of birth is the famous birth certificate. And there's many conspiracy theories going on about this birth certificate. Well, here we're learning in the law, right, that the person is being assigned a name through the birth certificate. So the birth certificate is creating the person in law. Remember, the statutory creature is created by law. So by filling out the form, the birth certificate, you're creating a statutory person in law. And that person is assigned the name. Well, what name? The given name. Well, the given name to who? The given name to the living being. That is why when you obtain your live registration of birth, that document, right, it represents a living being. It represents something that is alive in the law, while the birth certificate represents the person that was created by the law. The live registration of birth is created first as the primary or foundational document, and then based upon that, the birth certificate is created. Now, when they create the birth certificate, right, what they do is they take the given name of the human being on the live registration of birth and they assign it to the person of the birth certificate, to the statutory creature that's created. The name is assigned. And so you assume that it's your name, or you assume that it's identifying you in your full legal capacity. But it's not. It's a statutory creature that has been created by that document. Now here again is going to come a little test, okay? So what statutory creature did they create? What artificial person did they create? Did they create the driver? Did they create the citizen? Did they create the student? It doesn't tell you, right? It just simply states every person, but not what type of person. Well, we can figure it out, right? By the use of the personal pronoun. The fact that that person, the statutory creature, is being assigned a personal pronoun, a masculine pronoun. So what type of artificial person can receive that? Well, a natural person in law. Because a natural person can be charged with any of the rights and freedoms of a human being that is compatible with its nature. All right, so we see here that they create the artificial person, which they make a natural person, and then they give to that natural person in law recognition as masculinity. They charge the attribute, or they place that attribute into the natural person in order to give that natural person all the rights and responsibilities that would be associated with being recognized as a him. It doesn't matter if you're female to them. It doesn't matter if you're male to them. What they're trying to do is charge the natural person with a certain attribute, that they can seize upon that attribute through the natural person and exercise some rights through that natural person. And what do you think it is? Article 2. Every person, the natural person, is the holder of a patrimony. Well, how did the person get a hold of the patrimony? How was the patrimony that existed for the life being, for the child, for the human being, how did that patrimony get transferred into the person? Well, because the person was charged with the capacity of a his. And under that capacity of a his, they can lay claim to the patrimony, because the patrimony is for a him or a her. And remember, it doesn't say here that every person is the owner of a patrimony, but it is the holder of the patrimony. And when they dump that patrimony into the legal person, it's being controlled by a government agent. And now it says it may be subject of a division or of an appropriation to a purpose, but only to the extent provided for by the law. So they give themselves operations of law to appropriate the patrimony that they took from you, the living being. And what's that patrimony? It's your percentage of all the natural wealth in Canada. It's what backs you up for you to have an adequate living for you and your family without having to use your right to work. The birth certificate that was created and the name assigned thereon, the identification of the his on that birth certificate is a minor, is a child. Therefore, it cannot make legal decisions by itself. Therefore, it requires a constructive registered holder. It requires an agent of the government to operate on its behalf. Same thing with the education. They have the birth certificate of the person. That person has been charged with the his. Under the his, they can make the decision to use the right to work. Remember, the right to work applies for the man or the woman, the human being. So therefore, if they charge the his into the person, and then they are the ones making the decisions for the his, they declare that this his is going to use their right to work. And in doing so, right, then they remove their responsibility concerning the adequate living. Because now you've taken on the responsibility to provide your own living. So therefore, you have no more need of the patrimony. So they appropriate it to a public purpose. So the government lays seize upon it, takes it away from you. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 24. Every child shall have the right to such measures of protection as are required by his status as a minor on the part of his family, society, and the state. Every child shall be registered immediately after birth and shall have a name. So here, the International Covenant, right, put the obligation upon the state party to register the child immediately after birth. Not to create a person in the law, but to register the child, the living being, the live registration of birth. Why? Well, that registration, right, produces the obligation upon the state party to fulfill their promises, to fulfill what they signed on to in the covenants. The birth certificate, it's a statutory creature. That's what's been created. It's a natural person in law. It has been charged with the capacity of a his. Therefore, any right exercisable or compatible with a his can be charged into this person. The his in the birth certificate is a perpetual minor who cannot make decisions for itself. They place a government agent over the his and then make all the decisions for the his. The person becomes the holder, not owner, of the patrimony. They appropriate the patrimony to a public purpose. Your live registration of birth is your evidence to your full legal capacity, to you being alive in law, and you have the right to it. Remember Article 7 of the Charter. Everyone has the right to life, to be alive in the law. Your claim of recognition sent to the government now informs them what? What are you telling them?